Hello everyone, nice to see you all. My name is Laszlo, this is my channel, UFO World. Great to have you here. Today I had the pleasure of speaking to Robert Powell, who is a prominent figure in the field of UFO research and investigation. He is best known for his involvement with the Mutual UFO Network, better known as MUFON, where he served as a director of research. He's also come from a background of science and engineering, which he's leveraged in the UFO phenomena. Today we discuss Robert's latest book, A Scientist Explains What We Know and Don't Know, which I would recommend for everyone to grab. I'll leave a link in the description. It's truly interesting and it goes into so many different aspects, and he applies a analytical approach to it and tries to include as much evidence as possible for a subject which is obviously quite unknown. We also touch on UFO technology, the motivations, the high strangeness of the cases, disclosure, reverse engineering, and some very cool information about videos that were not released. So if you do like today's video, as always, do subscribe if you're not subscribed already, and like and comment and share. And with that being said, I hope you enjoy it. Let's dive in. So Robert, thank you so much for coming on board today. Really appreciate you taking the time. I do have your new book here. If we can see that, A Scientist Explains What We Know and What We Don't Know. It's a very intriguing title. So obviously you've got a lot of experience in the UFO topic. You've been researching it for a long time. What was the, can you give us a quick overview and maybe what the motivation was behind this book, if you can?
Sure. Yeah, it's great to be on your show, Laszlo. The motivation behind the book is I've written two other books, but this one was, I wanted to come out and just say directly what I thought about the UFO phenomenon and what I felt it was. And so that's kind of what I go through in the book. And, in this book, without even throwing aside, all of the discussions about whether the United States has, captured some craft or damaged craft, or whether or not we have any, beings that we've got our hands on. Putting that all aside, the book explains how I feel confident that there are UFOs in our atmosphere that are non-terrestrial. They come from somewhere else. And I discuss, possible places they could come from, right? Because nobody knows, because none of them have landed and said, hey, I'm from Alpha Centauri, or hey, I'm from a new dimension, or anything like that. So we don't know where they come from. But there's no doubt in my mind that they are intelligently controlled. And the intelligence it's not from this earth, short of course, the possibility that they're time travelers, or the possibility that there's some hidden civilization on Earth, right? Mm-hmm. But other than that, I classify them as non-terrestrial. You could say an advanced non-human intelligence, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you covered that quite well in your book as well. I mean, there's a lot of intriguing information in there, so I'd advise everyone to check it out. I will leave a link in the description as well. Just to kind of dig into that a little bit as well. I mean, I think there's no doubt there's an intelligence, a far superior intelligence to what we have in our own world in terms of understanding of what intelligence is. I think, in your opinion, what do you think is the kind of key factor in this phenomena? Because there's lots of different things in terms of the craft, the actual beings themselves. Is there something that really stands out for you, which makes you perceive them as a highly intelligent force, I guess?
Well, probably a couple of the things that stand out to me. One is, this has been going on for close to 75 years now, right? And it's not like if you thought, well, people are just imagining these things, right? Well, then why didn't they imagine them before the year 1942, which was the true beginning of the modern UFO phenomenon? So, there's no good justification as to why people are just imagining it. And if they did, why suddenly they begin and then they never stop imagining, right? But the primary reason, I go into details in the book, I give examples of this, specific cases where we can tell from those cases that these objects are capable of accelerating well beyond anything our aircraft can do, right? So, for example, if you're sitting right outside and you see an object stationary in the sky, and it doesn't matter what the shape is or whether you think it's a terrestrial object or not, and that object suddenly begins to accelerate, and in 2 seconds, it's out of your eyesight, right? Short of it magically disappearing, there is no way we have the capability of doing that with our current technology. And we're not even close to being able to do something like that. In the book, I go through the basic math calculations of how you can determine approximate accelerations of an object based on its apparent size and it disappearing within 1 to 2 seconds, right? And I give many examples of this where you have multiple witnesses, even at different vantage points, and they all agree the object accelerated and disappeared within 2 seconds, right? So the G forces to do that, which is a unit of measurement for acceleration, are in the hundreds of G forces. And that's what we call, not to get too technical, but linear acceleration, which is just in a straight line. That doesn't count acceleration when you suddenly make a 90-degree turn. It's just straight line. So let's compare that to normal aircraft we have today. For example, an F-35, which is, the Western world's leading jet fighter, in a straight line can only accelerate a little bit above 1 G-force. Now, many people think, I thought they could do 7, 8 G-forces because that's why these guys wear the suits when they fly the planes. Well, that is not linear G-forces. That is G-forces due to curvature, right? But these objects can linearly accelerate at hundreds of G-forces, right? And even our best aircraft like SR-71 at high altitude can accelerate at around 2 G-forces, really. So it's minuscule compared to these objects.
We're babies, ain't we, really?
Right. And science builds in steps. You don't suddenly go from here to there. It's always in little incremental steps. And so there is no way that and it's not just within the last 10 years. This has been ongoing for 75 years. We certainly couldn't do that in the 1940s and 1950s.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think for me, when I hear people try to disclaim the whole phenomenon itself, and whether you believe in it or not is, totally up to you. But for me, I think the technology and the movement of this craft and the acceleration side of it is one of the most profound things about it. If there's beings in there or they're drones or where they're from is another question itself. But you have multiple eyewitnesses in very high positions who have confirmed this as well. I mean, I saw the Soul Foundation, I think it was, the Kevin Nuff, and he said something like the acceleration of the Nimitz case is more than 10 times or maybe 100 times the total nuclear output of the United States. I mean, that's pretty crazy itself. So I think there's something with that itself if you're looking at the phenomenon when it comes to how they move, and it's one of the standout things. So yeah, I do get that. The actual craft itself, do you have any theories, if from in your opinion as well, if they're drones, or do you think could be beings in there? If there could be beings in there, how would that even work? Is that something to even fathom?
Well, I mean, it's possible there could be beings in the craft, right? Because the accelerations that they exhibit, for example, that, as you just mentioned, Kevin Knuth talked about.
Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, well, that's how I pronounce it. Kevin's actually a member of the SCU also, which I'm on the executive board for. And I'm actually part of that paper that Kevin wrote.
Okay, cool.
And actually, the nuclear power force, that came from a larger paper that myself and Peter Reale wrote. And
Wow.
And what Kevin did is we created, Peter, and primarily Kevin, and Peter and I created a smaller paper that went into an academic journal because the original paper is too big for,
Right. Yeah.
and it's not written in the style that you write for an academic journal. But at any rate, to get to your original question, yeah, those G forces are unbelievable that those craft exhibit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's extraordinary. Do you in terms of the evidence itself, because obviously this is reading the book itself and obviously watching your content and your stuff over the years, it's very evidence based, right? Which is something that is definitely needed. And it's difficult because this phenomena itself, it's not the easiest to capture or track as well, which makes it very difficult for someone like yourself who's very evidence driven, data driven as well. What do you think the best way is to track and like collate this information to put into proper research? Do you have a particular method?
Well, kind of like you said, Laszlo, I am evidence driven, right? But at the same time, I realize that you can't always get the evidence that you want, right? Because it's not like a laboratory, right? In chemistry, I can set up an experiment, repeat it, do it over and over and over. But if you're dealing with an intelligence, you can't really put it in the laboratory. Now,
Yeah.
if you're much greater, right? If I'm dealing with a dog, yeah, I can stick him in the laboratory, right? But I can't stick something in the laboratory that's smarter than me, right? And run experiments on it. That's not
No.
going to happen. So, and that's one of the things I talk about in the book, right? We want to get more evidence, and to get better evidence is going to require a lot of money and a lot of very high quality equipment, something that today only the military has. But what we have to realize when we're talking about getting this evidence is, and I talk about it in the book, is if you're dealing with something that's much more intelligent than you have to make the assumption it knows you're trying to get evidence, right? I mean, imagine, a professor in a laboratory with a chimpanzee and he's running experiments on the chimpanzee. And the chimpanzee decides it's going to run experiments on the professor. That's going to be a little difficult for the chimpanzee,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it might be.
So, and I know we like to feel like we're at the top of the totem pole, and this is a concept that most people just think is crazy to even consider, right? But you have to consider, if you have an intelligence that's far beyond you, you could be the experiment, right? and,
It's true.
and not the other way around. And you
Mhm.
certainly are not going to control when the professor runs his experiment on you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's very true. I think the whole experiment thing makes the most sense, to be fair, and especially there's been talk of agreements potentially being made as well. And I think the way we can go through the whole experience, the abductee experience as well. But yeah, I think overall it would be probably they're experimenting. We're just zoo animals the same way, and this is flipped around the same way we operate an experiment on animals and so forth to figure it out. It could be operating from that perspective as well. And the fact that they probably know, as you said, that we are trying to track them, so they probably know how to navigate around that. It does make me question, though, why do they disappear? And you talk about this in your book, like UFO flaps, when there's like periods of sightings and stuff like that. I mean, I think you said it started from the Foo, like the World War II with the Foo Fighters as well. The glowing orbs of light as well. I done a podcast with Graham Randall a couple of months ago, and he writes about that extensively, and it's super interesting. Just a reference to the initial point then, if they do know that we are trying to track them, but they still just pop up here and there, flash their lights, and then zip off somewhere, what do you think the motivation could be for that?
That's a tough question, right? Because we don't know. You're trying to put our mind into the mind of an alien that we have no idea how they think, right?
Yeah.
So we have to be very careful about drawing, very, very large conclusions, about that.
Do you think though, if you was like, if put yourself in the perspective, because that's why it's one of the biggest questions I've always wanted to know, because it doesn't make sense. Because it's true, they must know we're looking at them or we're searching for them, but there's the sightings around nuclear sites and weapon divisions, that I understand, because it could be a motivation of them being cause for concern, or them just being intrigued in terms of our advancement. There can be a logical conclusion around that, or theory. But when they just pop up randomly in different places, it always makes me wonder what the objective could be, or what they were trying to do, whether it would be to spark curiosity, to let us know that we're here, to see how would we react, that sort of stuff. Because that's, I guess, what we would do with an experiment to test a particular animal or something like that.
Right. And it's the other thing I think about when I think about this, right, is that if there's one alien species that has visited the Earth, then the odds are there are more than one, right? Because it's just like in the ocean, right? If you've never seen the ocean and you go out, you throw out a fishing line and you catch a fish, let's say it's a tuna. Well, the odds are there's other fish there besides that one species, right? I mean, based on our experience with life, that's the way life is. It's not likely that there is only one species out there that is located our planet and has come by. It's more likely, in my opinion, that there are zero, in other words, no life that has ever come by, than there would be only one. That's how I view it, just from a logical point of view.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense as well, especially the whole fishnet analogy. Do you in terms of the high strangeness, I thought that chapter was really interesting, and I won't delve into it too much, but I just wanted to get an overview in terms of some of the examples, because you broke it down, like from like tumbling to objects like barbells and the leaves and that sort of stuff. Can you, and also then I saw another conversation with you, I think it was recently, where you discuss a particular case, which was a barbell and had a blue indigo field, which I found very, very intriguing. Do you mind giving us a quick recap of that?
Sure. So this whole concept of strangeness comes from Dr. J. Allen Hynek's view when he studied this subject back in back from the 1940s to the 1970s and into the 80s. And his view was, when something's extremely strange, right, then what would cause a person to just make that up, right? It gives, so in a way, it's like it gives a certain strength to the testimony, because it's so crazy. Who would say something like that, right? So when you take, for example, a barbell, when someone tells you, yeah, they were out in the daytime or the nighttime and this giant barbell was just floating in the sky. I mean,
why?
Barbells don't float, right? And it's non-aerodynamic. I mean, there's no way something like that's going to float. So that's a strangeness aspect that makes you think there may be some truth to this story, right? Now, if they said, I went outside and I saw a flying saucer disc shape, right? Well, now they might have, or maybe they read about it in the newspaper, and so they're repeating something they've heard, right? But a barbell, you might as well say, I saw a bed that was just sitting in the sky.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. There's no point making something up like that. Right. You may as well have something in there which people can relate to. Barbell is random for sure.
And across history, there have been, I've accumulated all the barbell reports, and I think there's in the neighborhood of 50 or 60 barbell reports in the last 75 years. So compared to triangles or, discs and saucers or cigar shapes or any of the other shapes, the barbell shape is minuscule, but it's so unique, right? I mean, it's totally non-aerodynamic. And the one you referred to, which was in Canada, I really enjoyed that case, and that's what got me thinking about barbells. There were 3 guys who were hunting black bear up in Ontario, Canada. And the key witness is a scientist who has contracts with the Department of Defense in the United States. And their basic story was they were out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, their cell phone did not even get a signal. So the nearest town was probably 15 to 20 miles away, and that would be a town of 100 people or something like that. So they're in the middle of nowhere. They're hunting black bear. They've shot some black bear. They've loaded them onto their pickup truck, and they're going down through the wilderness. And suddenly, the key witness, the scientist, notices a light behind them. Well, so the first thought that comes to his mind, right? What would be your first thought? You're in the middle of nowhere. It's 9:30 at night, and there's a light showing up, right? And so his first thought was, oh, this is not good, and he's not thinking UFOs.
Yeah.
He's thinking of, maybe some drug runners or who knows what, but why would anyone be in the middle of nowhere flying what, initially he probably figured it was a helicopter or something.
Yeah.
He doesn't know what it is, but it's coming behind them. And well, as this light comes around and then moves in front of them, it becomes obvious at that point it's not a helicopter. And there's no sound coming from it. And it's approximately 150 feet across. So this is like a 737 jet in size. And it's about a little over 100 meters in front of them. And the object is shaped like a barbell. And it has a blue, indigo blue plasma that's all around it. And this plasma was about 6 inches. In other words, it's ionized the atmosphere 6 inches all around the craft. And so the first thing that the scientist does is he takes out, this was in the year 2013, takes out a Motorola phone to, take an image, a video of it. Well, his phone is, the battery in it's not working, and it's like it's going into a boot up mode, like he had just turned it off and turned it back on. So his phone's not working. So then he's got a Sony camera, one of these small ones about like this, and he picks up his Sony camera and begins to video. Well, as soon as he turns the camera on, it immediately turns off. And so he's not able to record it. So what he does then is he takes his hunting rifle, because he has a 9x scope on it, and he's just looking at it, very closely and making mental notes of what he's seeing. And he draws these later, and they're in the report that I made on this. But of course, the two guys with him, they're more of, I guess you might say, one's more of a farmer type guy and another's more of a hunter type. And they're like, shoot it, right? And he's like, no, I'm not going to shoot something that I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And so meanwhile, the object in its movement is totally crazy also, right? It's like, okay, so not only do you have a barbell shape, but the barbell has sparks that come out of the end of it, right? So it's like, why would you have sparks coming out of the end of your barbell? And to move, the barbell slowly rotates as it moves, going in a given direction, right? And so, I mean, you couldn't think of a crazier
surreal
story. I mean, if I was going to make up a story, I sure would not make up something like that. So meanwhile, as it starts to move away from him, because this guy's, is a scientist, he's like, okay, let me try my Sony camera again, right? Because the farther an object goes away, the less of electromagnetic field that it would be putting out. And he knew there was probably an electromagnetic field because the atmosphere is ionized all around this craft. So it's about a quarter of a mile away, he estimates, when he tries his camera again. So he turns his camera back on, and it appears to be working. It doesn't automatically turn off like it did earlier. So now he's videoing the object, and you can hear him talking, and he's explaining what's going on as the object, rapidly disappears. But then when he replays it, you can hear the audio, but the video is just noise, right? So he thinks it was still close enough that it interfered with the video, but did not interfere with the audio. And so that's kind of the story of what happened. And I was so enthralled with it, I flew up to meet the guy in person because, anything that was this, have an R&D scientist have, had the experience. I wanted to verify that this was all for real.
Yeah. And it was a barbell case, right? I mean, that's something you like.
Yeah. So I flew up, met the guy. He gave me a tour of his facility, where he has a large number of patents, and I verified all his patents. And then he even gave me a tour of, you'll enjoy this. This was a Department of Defense building that manufactures, various weaponries, and manufactures his, right? That's how he was able to give me a tour of it.
I see.
And this building was a British building.
Oh, was it now?
Yeah, in the U.S. And which I'm not. I don't study defense, administrative techniques and how we do things, but I was surprised to see that this is a British facility in the United States.
My British senses are tingling. I can feel it. I'm just trying to think. It is strange. I don't know why that'll be out there.
Yeah, but apparently that must be something we do. I'm sure there's probably American facilities in Britain that
to collaborate and all that stuff, right?
Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of the story in a nutshell. I mean, there's a lot more to it, but
do you? I mean, I mean, the whole the movement as well is and the blue indigo. I mean, it sounds like there's different. Who knows what these intelligent species think when they're about to jump in their kind of transport devices, what they're going to ride today, and take the Ferrari or the Porsche if it's different ones. But they've probably got different races, have different methods. Probably, I would have thought.
Yeah, and you would assume that anything of that size probably has living occupants in it, because otherwise, why bother to make something of that size?
Yeah, right? No, it's true.
Totally computer run, and you don't need it to be that big.
No, it's true.
You wouldn't think you would.
You wouldn't, but then we're trying to figure out what these intelligent species trying to think like, and it's probably like we always go back to that. I mean, have you had any experiences yourself? Have you seen a UFO before?
No. I always tell people the aliens don't like me. They don't.
You're researching them. Like, don't get too close.
They never show up. I mean, I can tell you there was one time where I saw something I could not identify right in the sky, but it's nothing like this barbell story, right? It's nothing like people who see something up close, so close to them that there can be no doubt in their mind that what they're viewing is not something that's from here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like mine, I could have explained it, by saying, well, it could be this, could be that, right? But not when, not if you see something up close. There's no way you can explain it away.
Well, that changes everything you thought about life. Just alters everything. I mean, 100%. That's probably why most of it happens, maybe.
Well, and it does change the way what you thought about life and just your internal workings, right? Because I've interviewed, I'd say, Laszlo, I've personally interviewed probably 150 people in person, and many more than that, via the telephone. And I can tell you that a certain percentage of people, when they see something up close, it really affects their life. You have some people who will silo it, right? They compartmentalize it, put it aside, and they really just don't think about it anymore. And then you have other people, they become fanatical about figuring it out, right? And it just takes over their life. I mean, I've known people who they've gotten divorced, they lost their job, all of those things, just because they want to know that they really saw this and that they weren't just going crazy.
No, I get that. I mean, it's when you've been brought up a particular way and you think you know what you know, or even if like I was very, I mean, I believe in something powerful. I'm not particularly religious in that way. I was brought up as a Roman Catholic, however, but since I've had my own experiences myself, and since it makes you question life, and it can be a bit of a head f. I'm not going to say that we're head fuck. It can really, because you're like, I'm working my full-time job in a corporate environment. I'm a talent partner for like an AI company, and everyone's talking about sales and this, that, and I'm just thinking, there's aliens here. Can I speak to anyone about this? And they're going to think I'm crazy. And you have to kind of wear a mask in many ways as well when you're in that environment, and especially when you're trying to dig into it to find out, because it's validation. So, and that's why I think it's great when you get people like yourself from a scientific background who are predominantly, I would perceive them as some people that if there's not enough evidence, really. Well, there is evidence. I think there's evidence, right? Because there's the sightings and stuff. But talking about stuff you can experiment on in the lab, as you said, there's nothing we can work with that as far as we're aware. So to get someone of your caliber to come in, it gives hope to other people that, because I'm not a scientist. So the fact you're doing it, it's making me think could be like, oh, maybe I'm not so crazy. This person's intelligent enough to do it, right? And you get people like all these high level officials coming out. Lou Elizondo as well, what he's doing as well. So there's a lot of, it gives hope to people that we're not going crazy, and there is something out there for the people that have had these experiences as well. That's my take on the whole thing anyway.
Yeah, it's, and like you said, in our current environment, right? If you put UFOs aside, right, and we have religion, we believe in God, right, and so, but we feel like we're the number one species on the planet, right? Not only on the planet, but just in our solar system, this whole corner of our universe.
We're just arrogant, really.
Yeah, well, exactly. And so to realize that there could potentially be a life form that's just another leap above you, it tells you, for one thing, that you're no longer in control. You're not truly in control of what potentially can happen, right? And so you really are dependent on that life form's benevolent and not malevolent.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing we could do about it. If any life form that's capable of traveling across interstellar space and getting here, we would not be able to do much about it. No. Because they would require interstellar travel requires you could say an order of magnitude of higher level of intelligence than where we're at today.
Absolutely. And that's, my personal opinion. I think there's good and bad everywhere in all areas of life. I just think it's a natural law of the universe. And I think that these beings, well, how many there are, who knows, but they would have done something by now, right? I mean,
right. That's our hope, at least, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm like,
right. I mean, that everything's a shade of gray. I mean, that kind of leans more towards it. They're benevolent, and and not meaning harm. But at the same time, even within human culture, different cultures operate on different time scales, right? Like in the United States, we look at everything the next quarter. What's happening this quarter? Are you going to get it finished this quarter? Right. And like in China, they have in Japan, a longer term view. They look years down the road. Right. So it's possible you could have an alien species that they're looking hundreds of years down the road. Right. So it's always possible that they could be going, yeah, we're going to get rid of these guys, but, not for another 200 years.
Let's see how far they can go. I mean, at this rate, we could just get rid of ourselves. I mean, that's probably. I mean, it'll make sense, to be fair. I mean, given us seeing how we navigate and what kind of path we go down, because if they are, well, they are. There is obviously a phenomenon. They are interacting with us in one way or another. And they do have the big. There always seems to be sightings and a concern around our nuclear activity and what we're doing with that. So that to me suggests that they are wondering where we're going to go next step. It's like giving a gun to a chimpanzee and saying, okay, let's see what this chimpanzee is going to do with it. If he starts going around killing everyone with it, then maybe we should take that away from them. And maybe it's time to, because it could be a threat, especially if we
Yeah.
develop travel outside as well, then that's when it comes to another story.
Yeah, or it could be like, right, the chimpanzees, they eat and they do this and that's of interest to some scientists. But what's really interesting to some scientists is that the chimpanzee has learned how to use a tool.
Mm.
And what will he do with that tool, right? And that could be the same for us. This is our leading edge technology. So what are we doing, with that?
Yeah.
And I talk in the book a little bit about why I believe that it's most likely that they are benevolent. And I kind of base it on how I have this innate belief that because I do believe there's a God and a creator, or whether you just want to say the laws of nature, however you want to look at it, that these laws go across the universe, right? So that if there's life here, there will be life everywhere. And if on our planet, some of our life is, aggressive and some of it's non-aggressive, right? That's true everywhere. And if you look at how our species has been developing, I think it's reasonable to assume other species on other planets might develop in the same way.
Mm.
And I talk about in the book how we're kind of at that critical point now, right? Because before you ever develop the amount of power needed to travel at interstellar space, you develop the amount of power required to destroy your planet, which we're there. We're not at the interstellar space level. We're at the destroy your planet level, right? And so the question is, it will probably be another 200 years or so before we develop the ability to travel in interstellar space. So we're either a benevolent species or we're malevolent, right? Or somewhere in between. Well, the aggressive and malevolent species, they're more likely to annihilate themselves long before they get into interstellar space. And so that's why I think the odds are that any species that comes here is mostly benevolent, right? Because they've lasted long enough not to destroy their own world.
Yeah, and I think that's a very logical way to look at it. It makes complete sense because we can see where we're going and our decisions.
Yeah, and I think that over the last 2,000 years, we have become better as a species.
We have. There's a common thing, right, where we're this, that, but we have improved. I had this debate before. We have improved as a species. I think overall, and we're better.
Yeah, but you have to look at it over hundreds of years, right? Because if you just look over a few decades and you read the newspapers today, I mean, you might argue that we haven't improved very much, right? Because we can do some pretty horrible things. But in general, I think the average human being today has more empathy for his fellow man than he did 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, 100%. I'm a big believer in. Well, actually, I wasn't before, but then I read something before years ago, and I was like, actually, it makes complete sense. How before we was very barbaric. There was a lot. I know there's stuff going on right now. There's a lot of instability, but it's recency bias. We've got the newspapers; they spread negativity because that sells, and it's only natural that subconsciously we're going to perceive. I had this conversation with my mum. She's like, the world. So I'm like, actually, if you was to look at it over the period of time, we've actually got much better and we're actually more caring and loving species because of the internet and different ways to share that message and to empower each other. So I completely agree with that. But yeah, I think back to your point, it makes complete sense that if they were to be visiting us, then they've obviously got to a level where they realize that in order to, they've advanced to a space where they're not just well, majority of them are not just killing themselves, and they
Right,
learn to
right.
master it for the greater for the greater good, I guess, or to how to put their egos aside. And I think that's our biggest problem. And this is why I think the UFO topic can be quite controversial. I mean, not that's not including the whole thing of them being aliens and visiting us from another thing. It's, as you said, it tackles the ego, and we have this thing of wanting to be centered around everything, and this takes you away from that. And I think that could be an amazing thing where it's not about us, it's about something else. It might have to humble us a little bit, which I think some people in some areas do need.
Oh yeah, I think overall we could all use a little humility.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure, for sure. Do you think, in terms of the disclosure movement and what is ongoing right now, how are you feeling about that? Because you've obviously been right involved with it.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know, Leslie. The disclosure, the question disclosure is one that I really don't like the word itself, really.
Mm,
So I've never really been on the quote disclosure bandwagon. Um, I mean, my view is I'm convinced that there's intelligence that's visiting this planet, right? Whether or not the military knows something that we don't and ever discloses it, who knows? I don't, I think the only way you get true disclosure is if the entities that are in these objects, right, decide they want to disclose themselves to us.
mm,
I don't think it will ever happen the other way around.
I see. You don't think we have the power to share that? You think it's going to be a decision from above?
Yeah,
Literally.
because and the reason I say that is all of our knowledge of this is mostly in the military's hands. Whether it's U.S. military or Chinese military, British military, wherever, because they have the high tech equipment that can detect these objects. Right? We don't. The civilian world isn't privy to the types of radar systems and optical systems and IR systems that the military has. So, in the military is always going to side on national security. They're not going to side on let's be open kimono and provide information to people.
Hmm.
And the reason, and I've talked to, for example, I've talked to the guy who used to head up the UAP task force program in the United States, which was the group prior to Arrow. And like he said, for example, we don't want to give out information because what if the Chinese are have learned something, right? And if we give a little more information, that helps them get ahead of us. And I'm sure they're the same, you know. So it's like everyone in a military organization is going to want to hold on to information. So they're not going to, which is kind of sad, right? That just tells you that we are still a world with all these little different tiny nation states
Hmm.
that are willing to annihilate each other and are willing not to not even tell the rest of the world. It appears, and here's the reason why we believe it, that there could be an extraterrestrial life that is visiting our planet, right? They don't want to do that because they don't want any other nation state to get an advantage on them. So that just tells you where we're at in our development right now.
Yeah.
So unless the ET wants to tell everyone that they exist, we're not going to do it ourselves as a species, at least not until we develop enough, right, that we're not a bunch of these little nation states warring all the
Yeah.
time.
No, do you know what? I completely get, and I completely agree. We shouldn't just be. No nation should be just disclosing their secrets as well. I get the whole national security thing of it. I think from my side, it'd be good to see a real effort trying to understand what this phenomenon is about. Because I mean, whether I mean, I believe personally they are investigating it behind the scenes and they know more than they're sharing, but then they're not giving that full information out. Obviously, we've got the Arrow report, which kind of confirmed that for us with like crazy broken links in there and wiki
Oh yeah,
fan references. I mean, that was just like we're
that report would have gotten a D- on any college professors.
oh man, that was you know, it was actually hilarious looking at it. I was like, did they actually they must have forgot about social media and the internet. Do they think this is like the 1950s and they can just like just send that information out and no one's actually going to but actually it probably does, because there's a big portion of the public that would lap that information up and just read the headline. They do not. We have, do you know what I'm saying? But for people that are actually in the know looking at it, they're like, what is this bullshit?
Yeah, yeah, and as a matter of fact, and this just shows you how governments control media, right? And not just the United States, and in most of your modern countries. When that report went out, they identified 4 news outlets
Hmm.
that they felt confident would, you know, make the headlines they wanted to see. And those news outlets never even checked the facts that were in the document. They
Hmm.
just took it at face value and came out with their headlines.
Yeah, no, I saw a picture on Twitter and I think someone compared, I forgot what news it was, but it was the Arrow report, and then there was another bit of information about UFO, but it was breaking news, like positive, and they compared the release of it, and you can see the Arrow report was everywhere, littered, and then you see the UFO stuff that was positive and would have shed light on some things. It was minuscule, but we expect that, right? I mean, there's if they have been secretly reverse engineering UFO craft and they've hid it from Congress, and then this is criminal activity. So trying to keep this. It sounds very conspiratory, me sharing it like this, but you look at their behavior and stuff like the Arrow report and the lack of information coming out, which we're not. I'm not saying confirm it, but just to show progress. And this is from all countries as well. The UK is just as bad. They're just like, no one's talking about us. Let's just keep quiet. So they
Yeah,
don't even bring it up to our attention. The USA's in the light right now. The USA's like, for God's sake, they're on our case right now. Which was like the UK, they're on top of us. Um, but it can be frustrating for people who are just want to get some clarity, because it is the most. I mean, it's probably it's the biggest discovery of humanity's history ever.
yeah, it is. And the two things I think that really have elevated the subject compared to say 40 years ago, 30 years ago. One was the December 2017 New York Times article, right, on the 2000 on the event that happened with the USS Nimitz and
Mhm.
USS Princeton in 2004 was when the actual event occurred. That really, because in our organization, SCU, we've had a lot of people join our organization. And when they say why they joined, they say, well, it was that article in the New York Times, and it made sense to me that there must be something to this, right?
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Because those were top of the line Navy pilots that
Yeah.
put those reports in. So that was one thing. The second thing was something that your generation probably takes for granted, but in my generation, we didn't, because 30, let's say 30 years ago, there were no such thing as exoplanets.
Mm.
It 30 years ago, most scientists believed that we very likely were a unique solar system, right? That there weren't solar systems around every star, that they were rare, and that life was extremely rare, and that we were unique and special. That was the view 30 years ago. Then when we started, now we've discovered over 6,000 exoplanets. So it's clear that solar systems are common throughout the galaxy, right? And a lot of those planets are in what they call the Goldilocks zone.
Mhm.
So they're at the right temperature for water to develop. And by the way, water is the most common molecule in the universe. They that is an established fact today.
Mm.
So now it becomes like, okay, well, yeah, there ought to be life everywhere, right? And so the modern generation, that's just the way you grow up, right? But when I grew up, it was like, oh no, there's nothing anywhere. We're this little dot, and all that exists, right?
Yeah, you guys were like the sacrificial lambs for us. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
You've, you've done all the. Do you know what? And this, I didn't know about the water being the most evident molecule in the whole thing. That's, I mean, that's number. When you hear that, it's like, well, it's a given, and it is. It's I would say more, if you was to ask generally, people say if there's UFOs and stuff, they would say, yeah, I believe there is something out there. It's not a question now. It's more like the question is whether they're coming here.
Right, exactly. That's the only question. Can they
Yeah.
get here? That's used to the question. Not only was could they get here, it was a question of do they know we're here? Do they even exist? Did they develop intelligent life? There were all those questions. Now those are kind of gone. And the last question remaining is, can they get here? Right. That's
They can. I mean, that's my opinion anyway. But obviously,
oh,
hopefully we'll find out.
I mean, we're already doing, and see, this is different too, Laszlo. 30 years ago, most scientists thought you were crazy even talking about trying to do interstellar travel. Today, there's actually a program called the Breakthrough Program, which they use basically giant sails that are extremely thin, and then they're powered by a laser from the Earth that would basically push these very thin sails, kind of like a ship, right? And attached to the sail would be a small computer chip. So there's almost no mass. So and they calculated that within, if I recall the time, I believe it's 11 minutes, within about 11 minutes, they could accelerate these sails to 20% of the speed of light.
Oh, okay.
And so that means you could reach Alpha Centauri in 20 years because it's 4 light years away. And so if you're 20% of the speed of light, 20 years from now, your craft will have reached Alpha Centauri. Now, the craft is the size of a computer chip, right? So all it's going to do is take some pictures, right, and relay that information back to Earth. And it can't stop or go into orbit. It's just going to fly by, right? So it's very crude, very primitive. But we've finally begun to talk about how can we do interstellar travel. And so I still think it's 200 years away, but at some point in time, we will have developed the power sources to where we can push a larger object near the speed of light.
Yeah. I think everything we're discussing is kind of just the next question, right? It's kind of, if we was to look at a graph, right, and we was to 200 years time and look back on it, I think it would make sense in terms of where we're going. It's kind of like that in terms of the questions. And I just wish people would, like look at our past and be like, okay, we was wrong this time. We thought we knew this. We was incorrect. Let's be open to it as well, because I really think the best way to approach this subject is to be not be dismissive, but be open to it, because when you have those questions there, you can then reveal the answers, and it gives encouragement to other people from future generations to come forward as well, because it must have been very difficult during your time as well, when the subject was highly stigmatized. Probably mentioning it, you would have thought you go straight to a mental asylum. Like, what are you talking about? Let me give you a tin pot hat. How dare you talk about aliens? It's just us. We're the rulers. I think everything you guys have been doing in terms of the older generation, even though you only look 20, by the way.
Thanks. I appreciate that, Laszlo.
But no, it's really paved the way for future generations. But I expect more challenges to come along. Like, we're probably bridging the gap to the new generation after that, for people to then come forward and discuss things. Like, we've got this YouTube account right now. I'm sure there'll be some other form of alternative social media or internet for them to utilize and go forward as well. So it's a process to kind of get this out there, and hopefully it's all going to be there for the good. I did have a question as well, because we've talked about the whole UFO cover up disclosure thing, which I appreciate. You don't like the wording of it, and I understand why. in terms of the reverse engineering programs, what's your thoughts on that? Do you think it's something that's feasible? Do you, I mean, because one question I would always ask is, how can a government cover up a secret for so long like that? And that's what many people like. It would have been exposed now, right? My friend Tim would have spoke to that person at the pub. They would have told me over a beer, and it would have came out. So how do you think? Do you think there's something like that ongoing? And if so, how can a government keep that up for so long? Do you have any theories?
Well, my view is that if the government had developed a new technology by reverse engineering it, they would not be able to hide it.
Hmm.
And so a little on my background, right, is I worked in the semiconductor industry in engineering, and we used to reverse engineer other competitor products. For example, the chip that goes into this cell phone,
Mm-hmm.
right? We would take it apart and reverse engineer it to figure out how our competitor did what they did, right? And so I have a feel for what's required in reverse engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't believe we could reverse engineer an alien craft, even if we had one,
Mm.
because it took us years to reverse engineer a human technology when we actually had a pretty good feel of how it worked,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Now
yeah.
imagine an alien technology where you don't even understand how it works,
Mm.
right? There's just imagine taking this cell phone and giving it to heck, give it to the best scientists of the 19th century, right? 150 years ago, give them this, and what could they do with it? Probably about what we could do with an alien spacecraft. They would be able to figure out this seems to be some type of artificial organic material, right? This plastic,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you had a glass case, which I don't think this one is, uh, they would say, "Oh, that's silicon dioxide." So we know that's glass they've got there, right? And then they'd be able to take it apart, and as soon as they started taking it apart, they would destroy it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there are metal circuitries in the chips that run this that are extremely delicate,
Mm.
and you do anything wrong and they're destroyed, and you have no place to go to learn anything new, right? And then on top of that, this thing totally depends on electromagnetic waves, right, that are hitting it, which is a wireless internet system, which if I just hand this to a guy in the 19th century, that wireless internet system doesn't even exist. So what can
Yeah.
he even figure out from this thing, right?
Mm.
So if we had an alien spacecraft, we could figure out what the outer surface was made of, right? We could say, oh, this appears to be a titanium, surface with, the following, materials in it. And we might say, well, let's check that out. Maybe we should build our jets out of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we might learn something like that, but we're not going to learn how the spacecraft operates or how to operate the spacecraft or anything, significant of it. We're just going to learn little small surface things about
Yeah.
it. But even so, even those little tiny things that you might learn might give you an advantage over your enemy, right? Just because, hey, with this, if I use this material, I can make my plane fly 200 miles an hour faster than my enemy. So now I can win the battle,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you still have that issue, but we're never going to truly reverse engineer an alien technology.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's why that people say that it's some of the craft, they've probably been reverse engineered by our adversaries. I'm like, no way. When do you think they're zipping around?
Here's my gut feel, and this is pure conjecture on my part. So let's make the assumption that that's correct, and we have some, craft that was left behind in the 1940s, the 1950s. Here's probably what happened. So the greatest scientists of the 1940s and 50s looked at it and they couldn't figure anything out, and the Air Force just mothballed it, stuck it away somewhere. 40 years goes by. Now it's the year 2010 or something. And some guy goes, hey, I think we've got one of these things mothballed somewhere. And so they go, well, hey, we've advancement. Let's see what we can figure out. So they take it out, start looking at it again. Don't figure out much more than they did in the 1950s, right? That's what, if we have one, that's what I kind of suspect might have happened.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's been the frustration from what I've seen online from a lot of reports, where a lot of people have been frustrated in terms internally that they've not been able to fully delve onto this because it's so secret, right? Any scientists can't compare notes. They would look at it. You have to sign an NDA. You can't talk about it, and that's not going to be the way to, if you ever was going to open and try to unlock this.
Exactly. I mean, just imagine you're dealing with technology well beyond you, and the only way you even have a chance at it is for all the best scientists in the world to work on it simultaneously in an open atmosphere. But that's not the way we operate, right? Because militaries, it's going to be a closed box, and everything's going to be siloed to protect the information. Yeah. So the likelihood of success starts to drop rapidly when you do that.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess it can just sit there and collect dust. How many there could be, and maybe one day someone will be able to do something with it. But I mean, I did see some stuff before as well. I'm not sure how true it is, but you touched on it where there'd be certain things that have been unlocked or utilized. I think I saw fiber optics as well. And maybe some of the aircraft in terms of the material used as well. There could be ways to kind of, that's been implemented in certain things. But it's hard to say for sure, but because it's so, as you said, it's like giving a phone to someone, even the smartest person in the 1900s would look at it and be like, what do I do with this? They don't even have the connection as well. Because these craft, they don't have controls, some of them as well. This is all speculation as well, conjecture, but they don't even have controls. It's just very streamlined and empty as well. So how do they even operate? It's probably something that is unheard of, right? They haven't got a steering wheel and a pedal.
Well, and just to even make that point even stronger, if I took the computer chips that are in your laptop or your smartphone today, and I gave it to the semiconductor world of the year 1990, when chips were still in their infancy, right? So that's only how many years? 34 years ago. I could give them the blueprints of how to make this computer chip, and they wouldn't be able to do it. Okay. And here's the reason why. The metal lines that are very small on our chips now, because we've shrunk them so much, it requires a camera technology that uses a UV light system, right? And shortwave UV light even. And back then we were doing optical. We didn't have that. So you don't have that technology. And then there are these what we call plasma etching technologies that exist today that didn't exist 30 years ago, right? And there are 100 or more different science developments that occurred to get from where we were 30 years ago to where we are today. And that's because science just slowly develops layer by layer by layer. So just imagine all these layers going up. And so if I can give a technology to someone down here on Earth, even 30 years ago, if they don't have all these layers in between, they can't do it. So it's like, taking a race car, one of our modern race cars, and trying to give that blueprint to the guys in the 1920s. Well, they can't build it because they don't have the technologies to make the rubber that goes in the tire. They don't have the technology to make the acrylic plastic that goes in various parts of that race car. They lack all of the science required to do it.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. I mean, maybe that's speculation again. That's all we can really do on some things, but maybe that's because I saw some reports as well of the craft being gifts, some still intact. Maybe that's it. Is, give a child something to work on, see what they can unlock with it. and who knows what can happen. But I mean, it's a shame that it's not a shame because it's how we've grown as well, right? I mean, war
Yeah.
in many ways and our anger and fighting against our adversaries has forced us to advance quicker. So it hasn't been a bad thing, but I think it comes to a point where if we was to truly advance, we have to kind of find a middle ground. I have no clue how that's going to happen, and I'm too focused on the alien stuff to even wonder how that would ever come forward.
Yeah, someone I would have more. I've heard that story, right? That they just left a fully intact craft behind and just left it for us, right? I would be more concerned. Okay, hold on now. Is this a gift or is this like a Trojan horse? You know, I, I'm not quite sure why you would do that.
Well, if I mean, there's two sides of it. Either, as you said, there. I mean, I literally think the experiment side of it makes sense. I mean, they apparently come here. They like the whole what's it called, the cattle stuff, where they like experiment and they experiment on people and all these different things. If we look at the abduction case itself and how they appear, they could just be scientists experiment. And if that's the case, then it could be literally give them this, see what happens with it. Oh, look, they're definitely not advanced yet. They won't even share that information with each other in terms of globally. It's the same. They're not ready for it. It could be it. I mean, who
Yeah, it
knows
could be
how
that, like a sociology experiment, right?
yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah, we're just all in a cage, really. We think we've got freedom, but they're just. No, that's the way I would perceive it anyway, because it's intriguing. I mean, the same way we study individuals and how they think, mentality-wise, why they do things, behavioral. Same thing. Like, why are they reacting like this? And there could be something very intriguing about us as a human race because we do have, I'm sure, qualities compared to other races the same way. I mean, you look at certain animals around the world, right? They are like the chameleon or the jellyfish. I mean, camouflaging. I mean, that is, we may think we're superior. We can't do that. We
Right.
can't just camouflage. They are superior in that matter. So I'm sure we've got a quality as well, which is interesting to a highly advanced species. I have my own logic around that. I think it's more to do with the emotional side of things as well. That's what I personally think. But yeah, that's a whole new story itself. I did have a really interesting thing I wanted you to discuss as well, and it's about and it's flipping gears a little bit. Appreciate we're going around a little bit, but there were some videos that were released. Obviously, the famous ones of the USS Roosevelt nuclear aircraft carrier, but there were some additional ones that you were privy to in terms of information. It'd be fantastic if you can tell us a bit about that because it was very profound when I first heard it as well.
Yeah, sure. So we have to kind of go back in time to when those videos were first released. So if you go back to 2017, in the New York Times, there were only 2 videos at that time that were released. Now, today there have been 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the 2 that were released, one was the 2004 video from the USS Nimitz and USS Princeton, and the other video was the gimbal video. Those are the 2 that had been released. So about probably 1 month after those were released, I was contacted by an officer, an active duty military officer, and he or she said, I'm contacting about those videos, and I'm contacting you because I saw your report on Agua D, and I thought it was a good report. So I thought you guys are, legit. So I wanted to tell you about those videos because I've seen it. I've seen one of those videos. And so the officer said, the one from 2004, I've never seen that one before. I don't know anything about that. But that other video, I've seen that video. And I said, oh, okay. And of course, at this point in time, Laszlo, I'm thinking like, okay, is this BS? Does this person really, how do I know this person's really seen, other videos? That's what's going through my head.
Mm-hmm.
So the officer says, okay, so that video came from the year 2015, and it was related to the USS Roosevelt strike group. So I was able to go and verify that, yes, in 2015, the USS Roosevelt Strike Group was off the coast of Florida based on the information that individual supplied. So then the individual goes on and tells me about 4 other videos that officer had seen. One of those 4 videos was the Go Fast video, but it had not been released. So the description the officer gave me was, there's this object moving low and close to the ocean surface very rapidly as the jet is taking a video of it, right? So I took notes of that. And then there was description of the other videos. And the first time I knew for certain that this was true was when the Go Fast video was released 1 or 2 months afterwards. Because then I looked at my notes. I said, okay, this guy's legit, because I can tell that this officer is correct, right?
Wow.
And of the other videos that the officer reported, one, the most unique was, and this was a video the officer said, I would be shocked that this ever gets released. And it's not that it's national security, right? It's just that it would be clear cut that you're looking at an object that's non-terrestrial. So the video is of an object coming straight at the F-18, and they're on a collision course.
Wow.
And the F-18, according to this officer, locks one of its dummy missiles on the object. And as soon as that missile is locked onto, that it says, okay, lock a missile. And again, this is a dummy missile. I mean, there's no true missile that can be fired, but the radar, right, is locking onto the object as if it had a missile to fire. The object suddenly, and the officer describes this as just like you took a laser beam pointer on a screen and just zipped it across the screen. That's how fast it moved off as soon as the pilot locked onto it. And according to this officer, on the screen is all of the radar data that supports, visually what you're seeing.
Wow.
So that's probably the golden video that we will never,
I was going to say,
no time soon.
I was just going to say, because if we was able to see that, then I think that would be, well, as you said, I mean, that's been some of the concerns, right? The black and white footage, and people they want to see a craft or something like that. But what you're mentioning sounds quite profound, and it could be something that could be unquestionable.
Right.
Yeah. Do you think, do you have any information, or are you confident or no confidence that it would ever get released?
I doubt that it will ever, be released. I have low confidence in it being released.
Well, it makes sense. Okay. All right. Well, look, it's been really good speaking with you, Robert. I've had a really good conversation, and I just wanted to, before we do wrap up, I wanted you to see if there was anything else you wanted to mention. I mean, of course, as I said, I'll include all your links in your descriptions for people to look it out. And once again, do check out the book as well. It's a really good read, and it gives you a lot of good examples as well, which is difficult in this subject. And I do find it quite philosophical as well, which I do love.
Yeah. I guess the only thing I would say is there is a lot of information out there over the last 75 years. And unfortunately, most of your government organizations, right, have not truly studied the subject. So they're not really aware of all the cases from the past that support, that what we're dealing with is a non-terrestrial intelligence of some type.
Yeah. And what's really good about this book as well is it gives you an overview as well. So it gives you some historical aspects. So for people that are in the know, it's good to get a refresher, and people that may not be fully privy to all the information, it gets you caught up to date on what's been happening, and then it goes into some of the details. So do check that out. And yeah, look, Robert, it's been fantastic speaking with you. Let's leave it from there, and we'll see how it goes. Okay.
All right. Thanks. I enjoyed it, Laszlo.
Super. Likewise. Likewise. All right, then. I'll speak to you later. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.